Hey, folks, and welcome to week 2 of your summer work for AP Lang. I have 3 takeaways for you based on just some questions that came in throughout last week that I thought might be good for all of us to talk about really briefly, as well as I have kind of a bonus slide to help you think about how maybe you could take an idea that you have and you're not quite sure how to turn it into a journal entry. How could you maybe have that fit a little bit better into one of our 3 categories? So kind of a bonus for you there. Let's take a quick look here at 3 questions, and then we'll take a look at that bonus. Before we get to those 3 questions, though, just a quick reminder, and this was in last week's material too, just a reminder about the purpose of all of this. Remember, you do not have a summer reading book, right? Like you didn't get an assigned reading book, which is what is normally the AP Lang assignment. Your job, though, is still to do plenty of reading through the text that you are reading, watching, listening to, whatever that may be. And so this is an opportunity for us to build our contextual pool of knowledge, meaning we know a little bit about a lot of things. Your success in AP Lang, your success in high school, and certainly your success in college is going to be about being a curious individual who reads and watches and listens to interesting things. And there's really no shortcuts there. We need to be consumers of interesting things. We have to pay attention to the world around us. If we try and take those shortcuts, it's going to end up catching up to us in the long run. So this is I don't know about an easy way, but I think it's an accessible way to start that process, to go out and find interesting articles to read instead of reading a book on its own, although certainly that can still be part of it. To watch interesting things, to listen to interesting things, to be a consumer. So make sure you're doing those things. And I think it's important too to be able to identify interesting resources to find those great texts, but it's all about being a consumer. And so that's where we'll get into an interesting text, a cool adventure, or something that needs to be fixed. What they are not, please remember, it's not a chance to write about anything. Avoid my friends and I went to the beach and it was fun. That probably doesn't have legs. We'll talk about that in a minute, as that was one of the questions. We want to make sure we have an opinion on something. We want to go ahead and read and watch and listen to something that makes an argument and then react to that argument. Please also remember, I'm going to move myself out of the way here, it's also not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination. For it to have legs, meaning we can turn it into something larger, means it has kind of the bare bones. It's our job when we get back together in the fall to figure out how do we turn a few of these into longer, more polished pieces. So just a quick reminder there. All right, here's one question. Do we need to complete anything in the other sections yet of the notebook? I gave you a digital notebook. Many of you have started to use that. Some of you are opting for a physical notebook, and I don't blame you. We've been doing so much digital. Sometimes it's nice to have something physical. You are going to need additional sections for your notebook when we return in the fall, but not right now. All you need to be worried about is your contextual pool section. Just make sure that those other sections are something you've created space for, but you do not need to touch those this summer. We will eventually do stuff with writing workshop. We'll eventually do stuff with argument analysis. We'll eventually do stuff with the word nerd section, but not this summer. Create those sections, but don't feel like you need to touch those. Question number 2, do we need a full text or can we use a quote from something? I know this is popular. We're on Instagram or we're on Pinterest or whatever, and we see a cute little quote and we're like, that could be really cool to write from. Here's the problem though. It's not a full text. And remember, this has to kind of bear the weight of the idea of reading, of a summer reading of sorts. So how do we navigate that? You see a great quote and you're like, I would love to write about that. That seems really, really interesting. Go find where it's from, or go find who the writer or speaker is who said that thing, and go find another text that maybe you can write from. That way you are reading or watching or listening to something more in full rather than a little quote out of context. Because sometimes that can actually be, well, it's always limiting. Sometimes it can actually be a little bit dangerous. Every MLK Day, what do you see? Like a little quote from MLK. The problem is it's usually taken out of context of a much larger speech in which there are some big ideas to grapple with. And maybe that one-liner that someone posted to Instagram or whatever it is actually isn't really representative of what King's larger argument was. We'll talk about that closer to MLK Day. We'll look at some pieces where it's like, hey, this is a great quote that everyone loves to hold up. Look at the paragraph before it. Look at the paragraph after it. How does that fit into a larger context? So if you see something, you're like, oh man, that's only a line or two. Don't panic. use it, but go find what it's from, create a little bit of extra context. Those can be some really, really interesting entry points. All right. Last but not least, what do you mean by the writing should have legs? I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it's the idea that it has potential to go somewhere, to be turned into a more polished piece at a later date. You don't need to do that now, necessarily. You don't need to write a full essay. But one question I'm going to ask you when we sit down, when we come back in the fall, is going to be, hey, if you were to turn this into something a little bit larger, what do you think that you would want to write about? Like, how might you turn this into something that more people care about, that a broader audience is going to care about? So think about these cool adventures, one that I think has some legs and one that probably doesn't. So here's a cool adventure with legs. I've really gotten into photography. I think it's a cool medium for capturing the world around us. And then, boom, that person's off and running talking about why they like photography. It's not a perfect piece yet. It's not expected to be. But could you eventually turn that into an essay that a broader audience cares about the power of photography and why we're so drawn to images, and why that's also not just a recent history, maybe why photography has mattered in the past and how it's adapting? Absolutely, that could be a cool piece. And it's part of my job to help you figure out how to do that. But I want you looking for those opportunities. So what a great thing to say, like, I'm super into photography. I want to do a writing on that. But it also has legs to be about something that's more than you. Then we compare that with a cool adventure, but it doesn't really have legs. My friends and I went to the beach and it was really fun. That's really hard to turn into something larger. I mean, maybe you could do a writing on why friendship matters, but what are the chances that you're going to be in college and be asked to write a piece about why going to the beach with friends matters? I think that's a harder sell, right? I want you to think about, if you're going to sell me these ideas, which one do you say, I don't know quite how to do it, but like that feels like something that could be really cool, versus I hung out with my friends and it was fun. A little bit harder of a sell. So hopefully that kind of clarifies the writing with legs. All right, final thing. One of your peers sent me this as kind of hey, I'd love a little bit of feedback. I think it is a great example of a piece that maybe doesn't have legs yet, but is on the edge of them. And I want to talk about how this particular person could maybe polish this up. And I think it's going to help all of us, because you might find yourself kind of stuck in a similar position. Because as you look at this, you'll notice that, like, I think there are some really good things here, and it's clearly something that the writer's interested in. And so I want them to write about it. But how do you do that when it's not quite a summer adventure? In short, and certainly you can read through this on your own, I'll get myself out of the way here. This writer is kind of writing about that idea of struggling with the idea of not knowing where to go to college and making that big decision, and feeling like the people around them are making those decisions and have a better feeling than this person does. That's a great essay topic, but this particular entry doesn't quite fit into anything yet, right? Like, it's not an interesting text. They didn't go out and read or write, or they didn't go out and read anything. They didn't watch anything. They didn't listen to anything. I guess there's kind of a problem there, but it didn't really stem from reading or watching or listening to anything. They included it as kind of a cool adventure, but a cool adventure is more for, hey, I went and did something. So it didn't really fit anywhere. So how could we turn this into something that's a little bit more fleshed out? How could we turn this into something with legs? How can we push it from good to great? Well, for this particular writer, they're thinking about that idea of knowing that big decisions are coming and not being really sure how to make them. Or is it okay to not know? That right there is something that we on a larger scale can relate to. So while this writer can certainly write about their experiences, how could they turn this into something that matters on a broader scale? Here's what I'd suggest. Go to TED.com. Search TED Talks for decision making. Maybe there's a headline that you could watch, and maybe there's something in there where it's like, hey, here's what the speaker said. And that helped me kind of think through what I'm grappling with. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to play with. Or maybe it's more about the idea of, is it okay to not know, to not be totally sure with what it is that I want to be doing right now? Go to TED.com or search around a little bit. See if you can find a text. I think that would be a really cool pairing. And that way you have kind of a writer or a speaker commenting on a larger idea, and you can bring yourself in as one example of kind of this broader thing that we can all be thinking about, which is we all have big decisions. What goes into making good decisions? Or is it okay to not know stuff yet? Why is it okay to say, I'm 15 and I don't quite have it figured out, and it's scary that everyone else feels like it does? Go find another voice to bring in. That might be a great way to turn this into something that's going to have a little bit more legs. Because if it remains only with us as individuals, it's hard to get a broader audience to care about. We have to think about what is there on kind of a broader human level that people can connect to. A great way to connect it is to go and find someone else who's kind of grappling with the same thing. Maybe not word for word. Maybe they're not grappling with college per se, although you could probably find a writing like that. But they're grappling with something about decision making or something about being in the unknown. Go find an interesting text to pair it with. I think you'll find a lot of success. Finally, if you have any questions, comments, and concerns as you work, don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to send me an email and say, here's an entry. What do you think? I'll either get back to you or maybe we'll even use it as an example here. And that way we can kind of grapple with it as a whole class. I look forward to seeing these entries come in. And as you are working on them, folks, please just remember what they are and what they are not. Folks, best of luck. Happy writing. So excited to see all that you come up with. Take care.